Hello and welcome to this session entitled Transitioning to a Green Middle East. My name is Mina Al-Oraibi. I'm the editor-in-chief of The National based in the UAE, and I'm delighted to be leading our conversation today. This topic is always important, but particularly at this moment when we see much of the region dealing with terrible sandstorms, concerns about water scarcity, realizing that the damage of climate change is here. This is no longer a conversation about the future, rather about the now. The statistics and the details are quite concerning. 12 of the 17 most water-stressed countries in the world are in our region. In Iraq, average temperatures are rising 2 to 7 times higher than the global average. The cost of water in Jordan increased by 30% over the past decade, and many other concerning trends to be seen. At the same time, there are also incredible opportunities, and we've seen a change not only in the conversation, but in the strategies in the region that, frankly, 5 years ago would have seemed in the long distance, but now it's here. So the opportunity that the region presents, but also that these strategies pose, are what we want to talk about here, but also what remains to be done. Digital technology can cut global emissions by 15%. There are certain things we can do in the region to leapfrog and perhaps even get ahead of the curve. Industrial innovation will allow for greener industries, and we see a number of countries in the region moving that way. The UAE, for example, established Masdar over 15 years ago, thinking about what a green city and carbon footprint can actually mean for cities in the future, hosting IRENA, the International Renewable Energy Agency, and being the first to sign the Paris Accords in the region and committing to the 2050. But we see other countries, 2050 net zero target. But we see other countries. Egypt this year will host the COP27, an incredible opportunity, followed afterwards by the UAE hosting in COP28. And other examples from around the world are being learned from in our regions. So the dynamic and the conversations between the climate envoys of the world are really having an impact. And so the largest economies of the region are taking this seriously. Perhaps other countries in the region that unfortunately are going through more instability, not necessarily so. So we hope that this becomes more of a regional dynamic as the future goes forward. To join this conversation online, this is being live streamed. It is WEF22 hashtag, and this is an on-the-record conversation. As a journalist, you always have to say that, even if the cameras are on. So we look forward to the conversation. To my immediate left is Minister Faisal Ibrahim, Minister of Economy and Planning of Saudi Arabia, Minister Abdullah bin Tuq Al-Marri, Minister of Economy of the UAE, Badr Jafar, CEO of Crescent Enterprises in the UAE, Lamia Al-Haj, Associate Professor of Molecular Biology at the Sultan Qaboos University in Oman, and Yusuf Mohammed Al-Jaida, CEO of the Qatar Financial Center. And I'm excited to say that there are a number of us on this panel who are deemed young global leaders, or once were, but we continue to hold the name. So it's great to see. It's great to see the World Economic Forum's young global leaders on such strong presentation here on the panel. So get down to business. Faisal, I want to ask you, there are some skeptics that still are not convinced that Saudi Arabia, with its incredible position in hydrocarbons and fossil fuels, is really making this green transition. And particularly as we see oil prices rocketing, there's concern that maybe Saudi Arabia will think, maybe this is not such an immediate plan for us. How would you respond to that?
Thank you, Mina, and good morning, everyone. It's great to see everyone face-to-face after some time. I'll start maybe answering the question about our economic transformation, just as an example. This transformation was started and rooted and underpinned by a long-term view, and it's moving steadfastly, no matter what the price of oil is. It was established at a time. Since then, the price of oil moved up and down. When it comes to the green transition, our approach, our policy has always been to have a pragmatic view towards this transition. We're talking about focusing on energy security, focusing on economic development and access, fair access to energy, but also at the same time leveraging that to lead the climate change and thinking about climate change a little bit differently. We have to be inclusive about the source of energy. We can't limit it to one source of energy. I think there's a lot of progress that can happen on a wider base of energy, and thinking inclusively is important, but also inclusively in terms of thinking about reducing emissions or technologies that can improve carbon capture and carbon removal, not just finding other sources of energy. And I think we have adopted that approach. It's always been part of our transformation plans. The evidence is in our plans by 2030 to have 50% of our energy utility to be supplied by renewables. We have the lowest cost in terms of global records, the lowest cost for wind and solar at 1.99 cents and 1.04 cents. We also have large investments in development for green hydrogen in NEOM, for example. We have plans for the a large carbon capture and utilization and storage hub in Saudi Arabia with 44 million ton capacity annually. So we really are putting our money where our mouth is because of the importance of the transition, but because this has always been a long-term view for Saudi Arabia. And it's especially crucial for us in the region to look at this. The world needs to know that, as you said, we live in one of the regions that has the highest heat stress and the highest drought possibility if temperatures rise. So this is something that is concerning to us. And I think I'd like to stop with that and share that it is of a concern with us, and we are actually implementing what we talk about because of its impact.
Thank you very much. Abdullah, I want to pose the same question in a different way to you, which is, are there any changes to your plans with the rising prices of oil, but also how does that feed into your longer-term economic plans?
Thank you, Mina, and thank you everyone for being here. I think it's a really great time to be in Davos, especially in spring. It's a different time for all of us. We miss the snow, but I think it's an important time to really come and think about the future of economy, and especially the transition to a more cleaner and circular economy as well. I think the most important, I just want to touch base on my colleague, His Excellency Faisal, on the aspects of transitioning in the Middle East. That's something which is important. Energy security is a high priority. And that's something which we need to really understand. The fragmentations that's happening globally, and I think the energy supplies will really affect the aspects of energy going forward in the next future. And I think with that, the UAE have transit and have a long-term plan. We have going to host the COP28 next year. We have a transition for net zero carbon by 2050. So we do have a longer-term plan into moving into that kind of aspects. But the important part of it as well, the creation of the company Masdar, the implementation of solar panels, globally projects helping the world as well to diverse their energy supply. That shows as well the UAE's investments in the future energy and the security part of it. It's a huge part that really needs to be considered, and I think the UAE have seen that as a huge transition as well with the Saudi Arabia, that the investment in the diversifying the energy aspects is important and vital for any future development of the region.
So there are government plans and important long-term visions, but there are different, of course, elements and aspects to this. Yusuf, I want to come to you about the role of capital markets in this, making sure that we're getting the investment in technology and innovation. And a point that's always been made, you still need continued investment in hydrocarbons to get us through this transition, because ultimately it is a transition. So I want to ask you that, but I also want to ask you about what Qatar is doing when it comes to this green transition.
Well, thank you, Mina, for having me. Assalamu alaikum. I'm glad to be here in the spring. It's a lot easier, to be honest.
We're going to take a poll at the end of this of who wants to keep it in the spring, because I'm all for the snow. But anyway, moving on.
I mean, these are very sensitive times. I mean, since the war between Russia and Ukraine, I think the region has a lot more attention in terms of securing energy. And we've seen, a lot of talks from leaders from around the region with many countries in terms of trying to replace whatever is replaceable from Russian energy. Easier said than done. But, from a Qatari perspective, I think the position in terms of environment development has been announced very early on from Qatar's plan. We've announced the Qatar National Development Strategy 2030, and one of the main pillars of that is the environment development on top of human development and social development. Now, on environment development, we've taken a lot of initiatives in Qatar in that sense. Qatar has provided $2 billion in helping developing countries around the world. We've also announced $100 million US dollars to small island developing states to deal with climate change and natural disasters. So in terms of global initiatives, Qatar and His Highness spoke very eloquently in terms of Qatar's role in securing energy and ensuring also the protection of the environment and the climate. In terms of sustainable finance, I think where the financial part fits within the environment equation. And us in the Qatar Financial Center, we've recently launched the bond and sukuk issuance and guidance notes for basically local institutions, mainly financial institutions, to start putting together ESG reporting and guidelines to raise capital into more friendly environment projects, if you will. The Qatar National Bank, for example, which is the biggest bank in Qatar, has raised $600 million. I think that's the biggest bond issuance in the region to date. And that was oversubscribed 4 times. So you can see there's a lot of demand in terms of finance and investments when it comes into ESG and environment development. Now, if you look at sustainable finance, the environment part, of course, when funds are being raised into the E part of the ESG, that's called green financing. And I think, you know, whether it's asset management, whether it's investments, whether it's sukuks and bonds, I think there's going to be a lot of demand towards sustainable finance. And we are in the process of basically initiating a strategy in the financial center to complement existing strategies, which is Islamic finance, with sustainable finance, and hopefully be able to attract more capital into ESG.
Thank you. So when we think about this transition, there is, you know, regulation, planning, taking on big projects, finance, sustainable finance, but there's also the R&D and technology element. And I want to come to you about this. I mean, do we have the innovation, the R&D necessary in the region? Is it okay to perhaps get it from other parts of the world as we learn, and the whole world is in a learning process on this? Talk to us about the R&D in the region.
Thank you very much, Mina. First of all, thanks for bringing the voice of research and development and academia on such a very important panel, because unless we work together, I mean, that's the first stepping stone. As you mentioned, there's what I call the triangle that will make the research actually really feed into industry, which Noah Al-Harari explains beautifully in his book Homo Sapiens in the last chapter, is the integration of government, private sector, and research and development, which I can see already beautifully laid out in this panel. We have government, we have private sector, and we have the research. And it's because we can have great research, we can have outstanding results, but if we don't have the investors, you know, investing in this research, if we don't have the government legislations that support that research, it won't go anywhere. And I'm glad to say that this has been there's so much awareness of this now. Actually, in Oman, we have a platform called Ijad that does exactly that. It's a platform that connects research institutions to government institutions with the private sector. And that's how I actually got my fund to do my research into biofuel, which is one of the sources of renewable energy. If you just give me a few seconds to mention, there are several projects in Oman that with regard to renewable energy, whether it's solar, wind, more recently green hydrogen, which has specific and huge attention, especially by His Majesty. And on behalf of our minister here, which I'm humbled to be sitting in front of, we could like to call for investors to look into this large project of green hydrogen that's taking place. So there's already a lot of attention on the green hydrogen project, which is expected to be one of the largest ones in the world, because we can provide solar and wind at compatible prices. The research is, I mean, there's two parts. I'm really happy to say that the youth are finding it important to look into renewable energy. We have SMEs working on these projects. We have students graduating with the graduating projects on it. So the research is there, and it's accelerating because of the attention given by the government and the private sector. But unless we have that triangle, it wouldn't reach very far. And I'm happy that this panel is giving that attention.
So the other side of that triangle is private sector. So Badr, I want to turn to you. Because again, when we talk about financing and when we talk about innovation, the private sector has to play such an important role. But at the same time, as we were saying, this is a transition. And so the role of both the private sector, but also companies like yours, like Crescent Petroleum, that is still very much working in the fossil fuel sector. How can they be part of that bridging and transitioning?
So, Mina, I have a problem with the word transition.
Okay.
Because I think what it does is sets us up to, or forces us to think about this issue or challenge in a reductionist way. And it makes us fall victim to our gap instincts, thinking about this, thinking about these two issues as warring factions. And forcing regions of the world to choose between climate or growth. The reality, of course, as we know, is that climate and growth are two sides of the same coin. And using that same analogy, the edge of that coin should be conducive policy that supports a greener evolution, I think a better word than transition, a greener evolution of our energy systems to make sure that we are not compromising our social and, of course, socio-economic and economic objectives and goals. And I think for the MENA region, there are a few things that can be done in terms of low-hanging fruit to achieve that. And I think private sector cuts across, obviously, all of these with conducive government policy.
Right.
First, I think coal and oil switch to gas-fired power generation. Of course, the region today doesn't have a huge amount of coal-fired power generation, but there are a number of projects which are currently in the pipeline. But certainly, we have today heating oil making up 30% of our electricity generation. If you just take the coal dimension, and this is a global stat, but just replacing coal-fired power generation to gas-fired power generation the last 5 years reduced GHG emissions more than 100 times more than all the electric cars in the world. So again, an opportunity. Cutting methane emissions. This is huge, and this is very relevant to the Middle East and North Africa. I mean, just Iraq, as one example today, 9% of all oil and gas-related methane emissions is in one country, Iraq. And as we know, methane is 80 times more powerful at warming our atmosphere than CO2. Fit-for-purpose renewables, obviously we've heard a lot about the renewables. I think there is, of course, a huge role to play for renewables, especially solar, in our region, but also making sure that we don't lose focus on the R&D dimension, particularly in relation to generation technology, transmission technology, and the huge piece, which I think is the single most important piece for accelerating the renewables rollout, is storage. And that's fourth one is energy efficiency. This is a global challenge, but in our region we have an issue. We're not as efficient as we need to be. Various reasons why, perhaps because we've over the years gotten used to and lazy and perhaps complacent with energy subsidies that make us less appreciative of what it is that we're using and the impact of that. But consumer behavior in general. I mean, simple one like food habits. I mean, the world today consumes 50 billion animals and 150 million tons of seafood every single year. If we just cut down 20% meat consumption, I love my meat, but cutting down 20% meat consumption is the equivalent of reducing deforestation by half. Final one I'll mention, my wife will not forgive me if I don't, and that's the protection, of course, and restoration of our natural ecosystems. Today, deforestation results in or contributes to 15% net GHG emissions. That's equivalent to every single car, plane, boat, train, every single mode of transportation put together. Yet we are losing forests at the scale 4 times the landmass of the UAE every single year. So in a nutshell, it's about smart energy policy, more smart energy policy, less politicized rhetoric. And of course, I am biased, but I am very proud of what the UAE has established as a 2050 policy, which really uses a combination of renewables, gas, hydrogen, and nuclear to make sure that we are tending in the right direction and supporting a greener evolution, whilst at the same time not compromising growth.
The energy mix equation is such an important one for our region, and also the opportunity we have. But I'm going to fire back on the word transition, evolution, because some people would actually say evolution means that we are now regressive and we have to be progressive, whereas actually transition means that it's a long-term thing. There are semantics, but I think the principle remains the same, which is this is now a journey. And for some people who unfortunately would like to see it happen tomorrow, it's not going to happen tomorrow. But at the same time, we can't be complacent and say this is just for the future.
Just
so
very,
it's starting
very quickly on that, if I may. I'm not going to argue with you, of course, you're the panelists. But I think the transition focuses a bit too much on your starting point and the end point, which is, you know, a fossil fuel world to a net zero world. Whereas evolution, I think, supports more thinking around the journey. And we cannot forget about the journey, which I think we are. And a lot of politicized rhetoric today forgets about that journey, which is why today we are much further away than our climate goals. Despite $5 trillion invested in renewables over the last 20 years, today our GHG emissions are 50% more than our very first COP in 1995. So the results speak for themselves.
And in a way, that takes into the fact that as much as we talk about the region, other regions of the world, this is a global issue. And so that multilateral stake is really important. I want to open it to the floor because we don't have a lot of time. So if there are any questions, please just indicate to me. Microphone will come to you, and please just identify yourself. So gentlemen sitting at the front here, please.
Thank you very much. Amr Madani, CEO of the Royal Commission for Al-Ula. I think one of the things that's working very well for us in Saudi Arabia is to put green not only as part of the economic regeneration agenda, but put it in the business model of the new tourist destinations. Al-Ula being a natural and cultural heritage of the world, we have no choice but to sustain ecological system restoration, green and natural life, not because it's good for the environment only, but because it is a core driver of our own tourism economics. So we encourage, again, less politicization of the issue, more economics thinking, but also even going further and putting it at the core business model so the financial incentives drive it faster than the voice of debate that sometimes doesn't produce the results. I mean, look, today and first COP. So we're proud in Al-Ula, as part of the Saudi 2030 vision, that it is not only for economic activities, it's a core business proposition to be fully ecologically restored destination. Thank you.
Thank you, Your Excellency.
My name is Saeed Al-Saqri. I'm the Minister of Economy of Oman. And actually, I have a question for the panel, maybe His Excellency Faisal and His Excellency Abdullah. The question is, the region actually has been the source of energy, fossil fuel energy. Do you see that the region could be the source of renewable energy? And when do you think that is going to happen? And what does it take to really be the major source of energy, renewable energy in the future? Thank you.
Can you allow me just to maybe tap on this? I think if we look at it from the opportunity perspective, a very recent study have shown from the World Government Summit and PwC have shown that there's $138 billion in just circular initiatives programs that can actually benefit the Middle East and the GCC region. That is 1% growth for the GCC region and for the GCC countries. These numbers are very huge and immense. Now, the point saying that there is a lot of opportunities if we to take it on, and there's a lot of losses as well if we don't really take that kind of transition or evolution perspective towards it. And I think the GCC nations understand this very importantly. Yes, we are have a lot of oil and gas reserves, and it depends on our economy heavily, but as well the opportunities that lies in research and the development of new technology and actually implementing it, and job creation as well. That will create a lot of jobs as well for the region, for the people actually to attract talent and bring in. So the opportunity that lies in it is immense and huge and massive, and I think that's something which we need to really study and research. It needs to be formalized in numbers to understand circular economy and greener economy and green growth into our economies, to understand how the growth of that can really affect, and from there actually develop as well more further strategies in the next years.
If I may add, I would say maybe there's 4 areas. I think the region is endowed with some solar intensity, wind intensity that can afford it. But it's the policy that let us have this inclusive view. I mean, the UAE, Saudi, other countries as well, whether it's nuclear, gas, wind, solar, or more efficient hydrocarbon energy development, we've had this long-term view for a while, and it's been informing it. I would add to it leveraging the capability to innovate and leveraging the capability to continue to invest when the world is not looking at all sources of energy, looking at maybe 1 or 2, I think we can leverage that more holistic view to become a leader for these 4 or 5 reasons.
So I just wanted to add on to that, Your Excellency. I mean, if you look around the panel over here, you have more than 16 million barrels of oil. It's pretty hard to replace that. Now, I like what you said in terms of evolution rather than transition, because I don't think a complete replacement can happen anytime soon. However, if you look at from a Qatari perspective, I mean, we have 77 million tons coming out of Qatar of LNG, and we're doubling basically our LNG production to 150 to 126 almost, so almost double. But having said that, of course, mixing other alternative energies is a must. We've seen many initiatives coming out of all GCC countries. In Qatar alone, we have committed, first of all, the main producer of our hydrocarbons is Qatar Petroleum. That name has shifted to Qatar Energy to give an indication to the world that there is an introduction of alternative energies into the mix. It's not going to be, like I said, fully replaced, but there is a lot of initiatives in terms of reducing carbon intensity, which I think is important. And there are targets committed by the state of Qatar to reduce carbon emissions by 35% in 2030. So I think concrete targets are important. A fully replacement of hydrocarbons, I don't think that's going to happen in any of our lifetimes.
If I can add on to that point in terms of the research, I totally agree. The research shows that there's a growing energy demand. So the idea is not to find a complete replacement, but to elevate the stress on the current fossil fuel. I don't think we're going to be close to replace it completely, but the idea is to that evolution. And I was going to say revolution, to be honest, because I was excited that it's going to happen faster, but I guess there's consequences. I think this is the younger generation trying to get everything done really quickly. But the idea is there's an increasing demand for energy, and the idea is to kind of slowly replace and reduce the elevation on fossil fuel.
Which is the point you made, Faisal, in your opening remarks, is saying that we see this, how can we, be it carbon capture, how do we make extraction cleaner? So I don't think anyone's anyone who's paid attention to the issue is under any illusion that you're just going to switch off and say, okay, no more fossil fuels. But the idea is, how do you make it cleaner? Is there enough investment in the fossil fuel industry, hydrocarbon industry, to actually make it cleaner? Or is there too much focus almost of saying, let's find alternatives?
I think there is the nucleus for momentum to have more investments, but for sure we need much more investment, and we need much more investment in adding capacity. I mean, right now in some countries that were activists for this quick transition, maybe non-pragmatic, are having to burn the dirtiest type of coal to get energy. We could have avoided this had we had a very pragmatic long-term view a long time ago, or had we looked at the issues a little more deeply and a little more inclusively. We could have been using hydrocarbons or gas more efficiently, more cleanly, now when we need it. And I think we need to not, humankind tends to forget. We need to not forget after this crisis is over that we have to continue this long-term view.
Okay. All right. We have another question here, and then we'll come to this gentleman.
Thank you. Assalamu alaikum. When Aramco CEO was asked by one of the journalists that you will be on the wrong side of history, he said we will be on the right side of reality. As Badr said, it's very politicized, and I don't think we in the region should fall for the Western media narrative. I think the media has overdone it, in my opinion. And going back to Dr. Lamia's word of revolution, there are casualties in every revolution. Let's remember, 10% of the world have no access to electricity. And the danger here is that evolution, leading to a revolution, might and will affect the most needed. Let's not forget, the narrative also has to do with politics, constituents, voters. I think we need to look at reality a lot more consistently. The world still needs fossil fuel, unfortunately, but the evolution is happening. I don't think that's a zero net game. I don't think it's binary. We're heading there. I don't think we should listen to the politicized Western media in excess of what it should be.
If I can just
Okay,
Sorry.
go on, Badr.
Yeah, I mean, look, I totally agree. And another, for the sake of being even more disruptive, I don't like the word or the term energy crisis, because this is fundamentally a management crisis, right? The energy crisis gives the impression that the problem is with lack of resources and then finger pointing at resource-rich countries. The resources are there, but again, the policies to get those resources to market is the issue. And to your point, exactly, again, the narrative, or at least Western narrative, if you will, is about how to get people to switch from one to the other. The reality is, just take the Middle East, for example. 80 million people in our region still are not connected to the grid. Another 80 million people have intermittent or unreliable electrical connections. In Africa, it's 600 million people. So this is about getting people connected for the first time ever. So all that is not really factored into the narrative that you're reporting to. But it's I think it's our responsibility and opportunity to create a narrative which we think is much more representative of not just our world, but of the emerging markets, which makes up, at least population-wise and increasingly GDP-wise, a much larger percentage, and in some cases the majority of world metrics.
So a quick comment on that. I think any transition or evolution or revolution in this space, and we need to maintain a list maybe, but I don't disagree with any of them. But I think any transition that does not look into energy security and economic development with fair access to energy, half of the world did not get that opportunity and can get it today with today's technology and what this technology will do. And climate change, all three together, would be one that is not balanced.
But seeing as we don't have Western media representatives on the panel who can respond to this, I just want to say that there also has been an important role for the media, just generally for the media, but also voices that called for change. Like we cannot deny that for some time there was a complacency around the world, not just in the Middle East. There was a certain complacency, and there needed to be a push and a racket that happened, from Copenhagen onwards, where people were like, okay, this is actually an immediate problem, because there was some kicking of the can down the road. And I think that we have to be very careful not to kind of, lean back. And that's the concern that some people are having. But I fully take on all the points that are being made, that it's much more nuanced. And unfortunately, headlines don't often allow for nuance. I'm an editor, and I can admit to that. Okay, there's a question here.
A minute before a question,
yes.
Let me just comment. I think just to transit gears, because I feel like we're the Ministry of Energy sitting on the panel, trying to really defend someone else's policy. But let's kind of change gears into circular economy a bit and really talk about the opportunities of circularity rather than looking at a linear kind of an economy. Where today, for instance, in the last couple of months, I sat with the industry, especially the transportation industry. They said, we have a challenge, and I said, what that challenge will be? And they said, well, the electrical vehicles that we all build, and this guy was from General Motors, has different adapters for electricity. What happens today when you take a car to your petrol station? All cars have the same adapter to actually fill up your gas. Today, if tomorrow, countries and cities and people who build towers and cities would like to have adapters, what type of adapter should we embrace? This is a global kind of challenge, not just the UAE looks at. Is how can you embrace future circularity of, for instance, the evolution of moving towards electrical vehicles, which will happen with the speed of energy crisis. This is something as well we need to really understand to look at that kind of circularity aspects to it. What type of these kind of policies that we need to enable, and this is just not just a comment or a conversation that we should have solo as a nation, but we should have it on the platform here in WEF and maybe globally as well.
And that takes us to the point of the opportunity.
Yes.
That actually there is so much, both in terms of creating jobs, as you were saying earlier, but also the investment opportunities that are created.
Yeah. I mean, sorry, just the green tech example. I mean, we've all witnessed really a massive increase in venture capital deployment over the last few years. And it's great to see a lot of that going into sustainable investments. I mean, we set up a corporate venture capital arm called CE Ventures. 4 years ago, we've invested over $350 million already, the majority of which I would say is in sustainable investments or green investments. And 70% of that is in emerging markets, including, of course, the Middle East and North Africa. I think the three most exciting parts of that in terms of green tech, I mentioned the storage part, very exciting. Second one, which is a little bit more exotic, is hybrid nuclear. It's sort of using excess neutrons in a fission reaction to power a fusion reaction in a subcritical way. Very exciting. If that happens, that will be a black swan moment for the industry. And the third is carbon capture. And so those three, I think, have probably the best chance at really accelerating the so-called evolution. But more investment by the private sector in this space is happening. There was a survey I read the results of a couple of days ago, and it surveyed 350 high net worth individuals from across the Middle East and North Africa. 92% said that over the next 5 years they plan to increase by at least 50% their investments in sustainable investments across the Middle East and North Africa. So we must, of course, promote and embrace that trend.
That's good news for me. Thank you for sharing.
Indeed. Send you the article.
I'll get your card.
We have a question here.
Thank you very much for a great panel and for a great discussion. My name is Sharif Abdelrazak, and I'm a global shaper with the WAF here. I come from engineering background as well. I'm a civil engineer specifically. One of the points that was not very much addressed throughout the WAF, and I'd just like to take this opportunity to highlight, is the very tight relationship between the energy segment and the construction industry.
Oh, yeah.
It's a very close relationship, but what I want to highlight here is that I was the first self-proclaimed sustainability and innovation engineer in my company because I want to try to digitalize and decarbonize the construction industry. We were faced with a lot of challenges when it came to the finances part, and with regards to the client, the least interesting aspect and the most jeopardized element of our budget was with regards to what are we investing when it comes to sustainability, to ESG and whatnot, which pushes us, despite our interest, to put our money not where our words are. So I just want to ask, how is this energy movement, let's say, from oil to more renewable, going to affect the construction industry? Because at the end of the day, the cement industry contributes to 8% of our global carbon emissions. So that is a very important element to address. Just wanted to hear your thoughts on that. Thank you very much.
So maybe one quick example. We recently launched the Oil Sustainability Program. It was launched a year ago. It has access to researchers and innovators. And one of the first things that inspiring team actually did was sat with all the partners for all our giga projects that we're constructing in the kingdom. And the focus or the mandate was, how do we use oil or hydrocarbon-based materials more efficiently? How do we have more efficient building technologies incorporate? On the one hand, because it is concerning to us. On the other hand, because of efficiency and because of its impact. So that's just maybe a quick example, and we can discuss more after the panel for sure.
If I may add to that, on the construction side, I think, green is everywhere. Construction is one area, urban planning. I have an example from Qatar. There's the Sharab downtown is the first sustainable downtown project worth $6 billion. And every single building in downtown Sharab is pretty much green. All of them are based on solar power, and every single building is categorized according to LEED. So that's an example of a sustainable city. But you have green accounts now, you have green mortgages, you have green insurance, you have green credit cards. So there's not a single sector that doesn't have a green component in it. On the Ula example, when it comes to tourism, I totally agree. Today, not only tourism, but transportation. Countries are setting targets in terms of how much percentage of electric vehicles are you going to have by this amount of years. In Qatar, we put 10% electrical vehicles by 2030 and 100% public transport by 2023. So it's important, I think, that many sectors can contribute to the green theme. It really depends on how aggressive does the government want to go on that. Sharing, of course, with the private sector.
Allow me just to add as well. I think about 35 to 40% of waste comes from construction industry. And by that, it's a huge amount of waste for countries and governments to really handle. And if we can reduce that 35% of the general waste that we really handle comes from construction, that will be really impressive. The thing that really we took on when we understood that the construction industry itself, as the UAE and the GCC country is a developing nation coming up, developing a lot of construction, we took on the Scale 360 work that we're doing with the World Economic Forum. And we signed the framework with the World Economic Forum in 2019 under the Scale 360 program to really circular kind of a lot of these challenges. We're coming at the moment in the UAE as a circular economy policy. I chair that policy council, and we're working directly with the construction industry to really look at how do we reduce waste into the nation. This is something which will reduce a lot of energy use, with a lot of as well challenges that the country will. But we need to look at what opportunities we can do at the beginning rather than we try to adapt to it later. Mitigate it at the beginning is the most important part.
Any further questions? Okay, thank you, because that means we can close on time. Okay, so I have a final question for the panel, but we only have about 4 minutes, so try to be brief, please. Which is, what is the biggest opportunity you see going forward in the next year? And the reason I say in the next year, because there's, long term and there's exciting technologies that will come about and everything, but something immediate that you're thinking about as you go about your day-to-day work, and you also want to inspire those listening to us. So I'll start with you.
So maybe not to let go of that inclusive view towards finding the solutions. I think with the Saudi Green Initiative and with the Middle East Green Initiative that was launched by Saudi a year ago, we've demonstrated the ability for all countries in the region to work together. And I think we can double down in terms of our investments, but also in terms of capturing the youth of the energy of the youth towards innovation. So I think let's not forget that inclusive, holistic view, long-term view, and let's maybe double down on our collective investments and on our enablement of the youth towards innovation in this sector.
Thank you. Abdullah.
Minav, just go back in time. Very recently, in 2020, when pandemic hits us, we realized that our economy is very fragile. I took the job as Minister of Economy in July 2020. So you can name resilience and agility in many ways, in different means. But I had to take the economy in different directions to make it more agile and more resilient. From that kind of aspect, I learned one thing through my experience in the pandemic: we need an economy that's more colorful. And I think that's something which is important. From a greener, bluer economy, we need to really think about more diversified economy. At day 2 in the ministry, when I looked at the GDP, I looked at an economy where it looks 30% of our economy comes from oil and gas, 15% from aviation, and 15% from tourism. That got hit from day 1 of a pandemic. What happens when another pandemic hits you next day? Therefore, we need to really diversify our economy, really build kind of initiatives and inputs into areas where actually we have a revolution, and maybe transition for you. But that's something that we really want to think about. How do we keep more colorful economies that really can aspire to?
Badr.
I think you mentioned 12-month horizon. Obviously, we have COP in Egypt coming up in the following year, inshallah, in the UAE. One thing, major opportunity, but also risk if we don't do it, much better coordination between the sectors. And not just coordination, in fact, collaboration. It's happening, but lightly. It needs to happen a lot more deeper.
And within the region also.
Oh, that's what I mean,
Yeah.
within our region.
Yeah.
Cross-sectorally, between government, policymakers, business, of course, and the academic sector, and civil society at large.
Lamia.
Well, it's always not easy to come the last, right? Because it's
Well, you're not Khitam Mohammed, because it was Yusuf.
I was going to towards the last. But no, I was actually going to say collaboration. Because we see the fruits in everything. I mean, the projects that I was going to mention in Oman, the Ibrid 2 solar power, the Dhafar wind power, the coming green hydrogen, it's all because we're able as the GCC countries to collaborate, and it speeds up. I mean, the Ibrid 2 solar project, which is a 1.5 million bifacial solar panel, was built in 13 months because it was in collaboration with the governments of with Kuwait and Saudi Arabia and so on and so forth. So collaboration is key.
Yes.
There's $2.5 trillion required annually to fulfill the SDG goals. So, and if you look at the green bond market, that's estimated at $1.1 trillion today versus $300 million 3 years ago. So that's quadrupled in about 3 years. You have a asset management sustainability industry that's grown to 1.7 trillion in less than 3 years as well. So there's a lot of money that's going towards sustainable finance. And I think that's where the next opportunity is going to be, because people have targets and people want to look good from a government's perspective. And a lot of companies, governments, private sector, non-private sector, foundations, non-profits, everybody's committed to climate change. There's going to be a lot of money pouring into green investments.
Thank you so much. And thank you for all your remarks. Thank you for your questions. The World Economic Forum is launching a Leaders for a Sustainable Middle East and North Africa. And the idea behind that is that you're going to need leaders from all the sectors to really come together and drive this agenda forward. So this conversation will continue, and it is exciting having COP27 and COP28 in the region. So really it is a moment for us, and with all the discussions around energy, hopefully it will be capitalized on and we can have a brighter future to look forward to, and one, in addition to construction and manufacturing, food and food security is really one that we're going to be talking increasingly about. Thank you all for your time, and thank you to our great panel.